Okay, everybody, this is going to be part 7 of this video, and today I want to do a couple ambitious things. I want to do a lot more documentation in our code, so we're going to do some commenting today. I want to update our actual IB documentation, our section A, our section B, as needed. And more importantly, I want to actually start connecting our data structures to our user interface in a way that will make some of the functionality actually start happening. So let's go get started on all this. All right, so let's start with opening up the classes we need. So obviously we're going to need our user interfaces, the main user interface, the new note user interface. We're going to look specifically at the code for these, so the code for the main and the new note user interface, and then the controller classes, the ones that actually do the logic. The main controller class and the new note controller class. Now, as we saw in the last one, these are going to get connected to other classes. Like, for example, the data structures class. It will be connected to it. Today, we'll also be connecting to the note class and the notes class. These are data structures that we've accommodated, we thought about in our user interface, in our UML diagram. And as we saw last time, we're going to also connect to our dialogues class. This was already done for us, so that's not a big deal. And we start this whole thing off on the electronic notes main, where public static void main is. So with all these classes, we can make sure our documentation is in place, right? So make sure we got all the right commenting for these as we move along. Dialogues won't need any commenting because it's already done for us. Notes and note. Notes is the collection of notes and the logic that goes with it. Note represents one note object. Data structures, which we already started last video, and then the controller classes, both new note and the main controller, along with potentially anything we need to change in our user interfaces, including any comments we need to update to make sure that this is a well-documented piece. But let's start today by commenting our section B, our record of tasks, and let's add a new record for March 30th. 2022, and I know it's not actually that date, but you get the idea. And let's put in there that today we're going to work on the notes and the note classes, okay, to add new notes or new note objects or instances to the collection. And our collection is going to be a linked list. We've kind of already thought a lot of this out when we designed the UML diagram. Linked list of notes. And we will access / mutate methods. We're adding those. We will also test these with the user interfaces and debug as needed. So if any bugs come up, we'll debug them. So what will this address in terms of our criterion back that we wrote in section A? So let's take a quick peek at section A. Which criterion, which success criteria will that address? Well, I think it's going to address 3C, allowing the user to enter more than one note. And this will cycle up to some of our other ones, right? But 3C, allowing them to enter more than one note, would be a good goal for today. So it's not just one note. So I'm going to put that as a success criteria that we're addressing today, 3C. Now, as we scroll through, we now put a little more work into our design overview. The design overview, and I'm just going to add another column to this table, just so that pushes. Actually, you know what I'll do? I'm going to put a line break in here. I think that would make this work a little better. So I'm going to insert a line break here. I can do it from a layout page. A line break, or sorry, a page break is what I meant. Okay, so our design overview, we've already talked about, has this our sketch about when it was just a prompt, when it was just going to be just prompting at the user, like system.out or console input. Then we thought, okay, well, what about a set of dialogues? That would be a little bit better user experience. Now we've advanced to figure 3. Okay, let's write a little more about this. Advancing the UI even further, and developing ideas around how the user will interact and the overall user experience, otherwise known as UX, with an actual UI that's a frame or form, whatever you're comfortable with, and controls on that form or in that container object. So that gives us an idea of what we were doing in figure 3, which I know is the one we eventually wanted to do, right? And that's what we've been working on. It's an actual UI with an actual place where the user can interact with it. So that was our figure 3, a further experience. In figure 4, this is not a user interface. This is a UML diagram that I was talking about. This is going to come in very handy today. It's a diagram of the data structures, like what stores the data, the classes, the connections between those classes, including what you see is what you get, the WYSIWYG, and maybe our marker doesn't know what that acronym means. So I'm going to spell it out for them. What you see is what you get. That's what that acronym means. UI designs that were built in the NetBeans designer. So I'm making that clear that that's what I used. And many potential methods and properties of those classes. So that's what our figure 4 really was supposed to do. It was supposed to be us sort of planning out how those classes would be interconnecting to one another. And that's what I hope it is, right? I hope that's exactly what it is that we have those UIs and controllers and then the notes and the note class. We know it's going to be connected to a linked list and a node. We got kind of all that down, okay? We also last time started writing up a testing plan. So this is a little more sort of detailed exactly what we were doing, right? So we did this testing during the UI that we put in stub code. Then we tested the OK cancel buttons. We tested the main UI for similar stuff, right? And let's actually be a little more clear about what we actually did in the last video. So including trying to display a list when no notes have yet been created in the database. There was no notes in the database. That was a potential error that we overcame in our last one. Okay, what else did we overcome? Or displaying or deleting a note without selecting it first. From the list box control. So that control that is a list box on our user interface, if you try and delete a node without selecting it first, that would be a potential error. And we've addressed that error now. We've got that all solved, and that was part of our testing plan. So let's add a fourth plan for today. Add a note object through the new note user interface, and does it get instantiated? So that would be the first thing. And added to the collection. So we got to test that today. So a testing plan to actually build a node object and get it put into the collection repeatedly. So that would address that criteria of adding multiple notes. So that's now part of our plan. That's part of our testing plan. It's part of our documentation. We've also put a little more work into the design overview, and we've added it as one of the record of our tasks that we were accomplishing, right? The error checking, testing plan on the user interfaces, and now we're also, maybe we could add tests. Oh, okay, well, we actually already did kind of write that in there. All right, let's get started. Let's get to the coding. So I already said we've opened up all these classes. Let's start with some commenting that we need to do. I mean, we know we have to do commenting. Maybe let's start with our main controller and our main user interface, right? So that main user interface is going to need a comment. So we have to think about what is it that the main user interface actually is, and what does it need? Well, let's write it in. It's the user interface view I'm using the word view intentionally here. Again, it sort of speaks to the idea of the one design idea, a little beyond obviously the IB course, but that model view controller idea, but the user interface view that the user interacts with. So this is what the user sees for all main interactions in this program. And what do I mean by main interactions? They're the main features of this program. Like all the main things you can do in this program come through this main user interface. Other than that, it's pretty commented. We know we shifted most of this logic over to our other class. Let's also take a second to comment the new note UI, right? So this is the user interface for creating a new note, okay? All right, so what would we need for this one? So in the new note UI, what would we say about this one? Well, this is the user interface view that the user, so it's very similar to the last one, interacts with when, but this is where it gets different, when creating a new note. So that's what this is for, creating a new note in this thing. Okay, then we have our controller classes. Let's actually write a little documentation for the, let's start with the new note one. The controller for the new note. What would this essentially be? And I'm also going to take a second to comment these imports as well. This is our required imports, or APIs, maybe you could put it, for this program. This is what's required. And you know what? I'm going to bring those over to other places where we have those. So I know that's just a little comment I like to put in all my classes where that could potentially pop up. I don't know if it'll pop up in Note. I think it'll pop up in Notes. According to our UML diagram, it'll get connected. So I might as well put that in there, and I'll move it around later. There it is already in Dialogues. And now I'll pop it into here, into electronic notes. And I might as well put in that little comment I have for packages as well that I've placed into some of these classes. And I'm going to pop that into our main here. And I might as well take a second to write a little comment about main here. The main electronic notes. This is the main class for this application. Right? This is it. This is where main starts everything. Starts everything up right here. It's the starting position. So it initializes our data structures and then launches a new main user interface. All right, back to the main controller. This is where we started. Okay, and there's our required, oops, wrong one. Our required APIs. Okay, so the main controller. What should we write about our main controller and our new note controller? Okay, this class is connected to the UI for all main program features and runs all the logic associated with that class. What else? This controller connects to the view the user has of the user interface. So just saying a lot of the same stuff there, but that's what this main controller does, right? That's what its comment will be. Now let's go to new note controller. And let's write something very similar for that, right? Very, very similar for what the new note controller does. Okay, so this class is connected to the UI for adding a new note and runs all the logic associated with that class. And then what else? Well, let's look. Or this controller connects to the view the user has of the user interface. Okay, so that's the same basic comment I have here with this one. Let's hit a save here. So we got some comments going in for all this stuff. All right, so where to start? Let's just do a quick run and see how things are looking. Whoops. I got some errors here to clean up. Let me just see where the errors lie. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. So here's our user interface up. Create a new note. We know we have error checking built in. And if we want to cancel the note, we can. And we can close this out as well. Okay, so that's still good. All the error checking we did last video are great. Let's scroll down now for these new note controllers. And we got to this point here in this where cancel and closing is done. But what happens when I click OK, when I've passed all the tests? Well, I'm going to get all the data now that I need. Okay, so I'm going to add that in as just a comment. I passed all the tests. Get out all the needed data. For example, the title comes from, and I know where it comes from. It comes from me getting the text from the title text box. We already know that it's been error checked, so I don't have to worry about it. I'm getting it out of there. I'm going to do the same thing with the date and the actual content, right? So the actual content and the date will also be pulled out of different text boxes, but the same basic idea. So in this case, the note text box will be where the content comes from, and the date text box will be where that comes from. So I pull out all the data out of the text boxes. Now what I'm going to do is instantiate a note object. In other words, I'm going to create an instance of a note. So I'm going to make a note. Note equals new note. So this is now going to be using our note class. And we see that actually in our UML diagram if you were to check it. So if you went to our UML diagram, you would have seen that we had already thought this out, that somehow the new note controller right here would be connecting to the node object right here. We also can see in the node object a little bit of the thinking we had, that title, date, and content would be part of the note. They'd be properties of that class, and that there'd be constructors and possibly other methods that we would need. So let's kind of follow our plan a little bit here. Let's follow what we kind of had to do. So instead of just a default constructor, let's pass it the title, the date, and the content. So it knows how to build a note properly. Now we got an error here, obviously. So let's also import the note from the data package, and let's have it build that constructor object, create the constructor. So that OK button will now do that. It will create that note object. Now what I want to do is I want to add that note. So now that we have a note object, I want to add the note to the collection. So that means over in the notes class. Over in my notes class, I want to do that. So I'm going to write some kind of a code to do that. But I know my notes class is in the data structures class, .notes. And I think I also had kind of thought of this as well, if I look at the notes class, that we were going to make an add method to add a note. So this is perfect. That was already kind of in our plan. So I'm going to make an add method and pass it the note object. But I have to think about one more thing. What about the user interfaces? Does anything get changed when we add a new note? And if you think about it, back in our main user interface, back on the main one, if we go look at it for a second, once we've created that new note, I want it to show up in my list. Oh, we hadn't thought of that. So when I click Create New Note, when it jumps over to New Note, right here, and when it creates that new note user interface, maybe I should send it a reference to my list box, which I have in this class. I have a copy of the list box right here. It's one of the properties of this class that was connected through the controller. So why don't I pass it over to it? So now when I get over to the new note UI right here, and when I construct my new note UI, I construct it with a reference to a list box item called the new notes list box. So let's import in that list box item. So now it's an import, which means I'm going to need that comment for imports, which I will grab right here. And now pop that in there. Okay, so now I have that, the list box in there. And then why don't I take that and pass it along to the controller? So I'm just going to pass it even further along. So then you can go over here to the controller, and that's where you'll, that's where you're going to get this notes list box. So that's where I'm going to need it. So there. Now the controller needs an addition to its constructor as well. So now here, we're going to add one more thing in here, a list for the notes list box. So that's now in there. And I'll add it in as well as one of my, oh, here, look, one of my private list notes list box. Perfect. And then I'll connect it using a line like I did here, but it'll be this dot notes list box. Oops. Let's try that again. Equals notes list box. So now it's wired together. I also would need a, all right, so we have to comment the parameter that went with that. So the parameter for this, essentially, the notes list box is the list box field on the main user interface. That's what that is. It's not on this notes controller. It's on the main user interface. Now, as I said, this then is passed along. So now that it's connected in the new note controller, what we want to do is when we click OK to add a new note, it will get passed over to the add method of this notes class here, right? So I'm just going to take a second here. I copied it to paste in that comment there. Actually, no, what I'll do is I'll just replace this one right here, because that's what it is the notes list box now is the list box field from the main user interface. So we'll put more comments into this in a minute. We'll come back to this. This is where we're going to be spending some time, is over here in the notes class. But let's go back now to the new note user interface. It looks great. Everything is commented. Everything is connected to our controller. Our new note controller looks great. It is essentially, I think, done now. It not only, when you click OK, does the error checking, but it builds a new note, sends that new note over to the notes class to add it to our collection, and disposes of the user interface, therefore going back to the main user interface. In theory, it's supposed to also add it to the list box. I think we could actually try that just from that standpoint. We could say that the notes list box dot add, and we have various add options here. Let's just add the word add for now, just to see if it's actually doing that, if it's actually properly connected to the list box. So if I put something in these 3 fields to pass the test, they would actually add. There we go. It's adding to the list box. And if I did it again, it would be adding it again. Now, that's not what we wanted to add, but it's a good start, right? It's adding something. What we wanted to add is something from the note itself, which is now where our next focus is going to be. We're going to go over to the note class, and let's get started on working on this note class. This is an important class too. So what is this note? It represents an electronic note, an electronic version of a paper note. This is something we kind of, back in our section A, that was the problem, right? Paper notes is the problem. This is an electronic version of that paper note that could be taken to remember important information. That's why we take the notes, right? We need it to remember important information. Okay. So that's our note. We've already used the other class to write a constructor, but before we get to constructors, we gotta make some actual data properties, right? Like the title is going to be stored as a string. Now I'm saying private because if you look back at our UML diagram, that was kind of what we thought out in our UML diagram, that the title would be private, that as well the date would be private, and the actual content for the note, the stuff they write in, that we thought we'd make public. Just it was a thought when we were doing this. Let's take a second to write the documentation for this constructor method that sets the class properties from the parameters, the past parameters. Okay, let's fix my typos now. Constructor method sets the class properties from the past parameters. Title is the title of this note, or this note object. And again, I'm having some typo issues here today, but let's see if I can speed up my typing here with the power of copy paste. This is the date of this note object and the content of this node object. And the date of this node object was when it was created. That's good to know, okay? The title of the node object, the content of the node object. All right, so I think we got enough. Now let's connect it. This dot title equals title. This is stuff you've seen in the last class we wrote that was similar to this, or in all of our controller classes we wrote code that was very similar to this, because you're connecting the parameters to the properties. I use the term wiring it up because that's essentially what we're doing here. It's sort of a necessary step so that now these are global variables of the class. That's another phrase you could use. It's more of simpler phrase to kind of outline what's going on there, so that when a node is now constructed, it constructs it with access to these things within the class, pass through the parameters. But we also need a public string method. Because we've made a couple of these properties private, we're going to need some accessor methods. So when we want to get the title, we return the title, because otherwise it's private. It's encapsulated in the class. Let's comment on that. This is an accessor method. This also shows some good programming techniques for the encapsulated class property. Okay, it returns the title of this note object. Now we're going to do the exact same thing with date. So to speed up our timeline, we're just going to copy and paste this method and change a few names. Instead of get title, it's going to be get date. Instead of returning title, it's going to return date. And in our documentation, date. Okay, but I'm going to also represent one more method in this class. I think this would be a useful method, because eventually this note is going to be shown in our list box. So we have to turn this note into like a line of text. If you did the 40S computer science course with me, you know we spent a lot of time working on this type of method, a public string toString method, a method that is already built into every object in Java and in other programming languages as well. So we are actually doing an override on this method. This is overriding the method that comes with the object class. Right? So if you want, you can find the documentation for this. If you're feeling like, I don't want to write this comment, you can find comments for a toString method in places like the node class for what our linked list will be. So if you look through the node class, you'll see a toString method with the comment that goes with it. So you could even take that little comment along with you over to our node class, and that could be the comment for what toString does. So it's the same basic idea. You could even go into the actual object class in Java and find that, that comment if you really want to dig deep. All right, so we got to make this thing happen. What will a note look like when it's displayed as a string? So there's three parts to it: the title, the date, and the actual content. But I think when we display it, we think about where that's going to happen. It would be in the list box, and we don't want to put all of it in there. So I'm just going to return the title, okay, and attach to that something to separate the title from the date. I'm not going to add the content, and I think I'll just put something simple like a colon, right? The title, colon, the date. So when I create a node object, that's what I return if I wanted to figure it out as text. And I think that would represent everything I need to document about my note class. This class is essentially done. I'm just going to check my UML, because that's what I said the note class would be. So yeah, it's got the properties I said it would. It's even got the methods I said I would, except I thought maybe I'd need more than one constructor. I don't know if I do. Looks like I might be good with just this one constructor. So I think this note class is done. Which means when I make a new note and I add it, now let's be a little more clear about what we're adding. It's not just the word add we're adding, it's that note dot turned into a string. Okay, let's retest this now a little bit. So create a new note. That'll be my title, my date, March 30, 2022. This is a test, and we'll click OK. Aha! It added the actual title and the colon and then the date, exactly the way I wanted it to. Okay? All right, now we're really cooking. So now that we've actually started to approach this from the perspective of note, now we can also think about the perspective of notes, plural. What happens now when we add it not only to the list box, but now as we expand on the data structure? But let's step back a step for a second. We got more work to do here at the main controller level. Now that we can add a new note, that worked really well, okay? What about displaying all the notes? We have to think about how that would work. Well, we would go to data structures, we would go to notes to get access to all the notes, and where they would be displayed, if I display them all, if I make a method to display them all, would be once again in that list box, the notes list box. So I'm going to pass a reference to the notes class so that when it displays them all, it knows where to put them into that list box. Now this isn't a method we have, so I'm going to create that method. Now if I think about it, that would also be very similar to how I would display a selected note. But in that case, I don't need the list box. I need the index number. Aha! So we have the index number for the displayed note. It was part of our sort of work we did when we were error checking it. So I'm going to go to data structures. I'm going to display the selected note for this index number. Okay, I in this case don't need the list box because I'm just displaying that one selected note. Okay, whoops, I want to copy that, and I'm going to create that method over in that other class. And now when I delete the selected note, same thing. Instead of display the selected, it will be deleted, that selected one. However, now I do want to alter the list box as well, not just display it, or not just delete it from the database, but also from that particular list box. So I'm going to pass a reference over to that as well, so that the list box will also get updated. Oh man, let's try that again. The list box will get updated. I don't need to worry about that when I display it. When I display it, how I'm going to display it. And for that, let's take a look at our design documentation. How did we think we were going to display one note? We said maybe we would do it in that user interface, but I think what we'll do is we'll just use a dialog. By the way, using a dialog is what we're going to do for the searching and sorting as well. This was part of our design documentation. So let's get down to that now. First, we'll create the method delete selected, which we'll work on in a little bit. And then searching, that'll take place over in data structures. Data structures.notes.search. So that'll create a dialog box saying, do you want to search by title or by date or by whatever? And then it will look through the database for those particular notes, and how it will display them is in the notes list box again. That's how it will display the results of the search, is in that notes list box. So I'm going to pass a reference over to it. Similarly, when I sort all the notes, instead of searching, I will sort them either by title or by date, but I will take care of that over in that other class, but I will display the sorted results in that list box. So I'm going to send a reference over to the list box. And did I create that method? Let's try that again. There we go. So I created the method over in the other class. Finally, I think when I'm closing this, when I dispose of it, I think there's one other thing I need to do. And I think I need to do it over in data structures. Oops. I need to also take the notes and save them to a file, to permanent storage. So I'm going to make a closing method over there as well that kind of takes the database and sends it over to an actual permanent storage, permanent file. I thought about that as well when the main class appears, when the main user interface appears. I make a new controller, okay? In that instance, maybe that's when I load in my data structures. But I think as well, if we look at our data structures class, we were kind of thinking about that with the initialize idea as well. That when we make new notes, that maybe is where we would actually then build in that sort of thing. Because this initialize method is called before the main user interface even appears, right? It initializes, then the main user interface appears. So if the notes have already been loaded in from the file, we don't have to worry about that. But what I'm saying now is I think all the logic of main controller is done. Let's just double check. We'll check our documentation and we'll check our logic. I think it's done. Let's take a quick look. So we got all our comments for the main controller. Okay. Got the constructor, connects the main UI and the list box to this class. Makes the user interface, not resizable and centers it on the screen. When a new note button is clicked, it sends it over to the new note UI with the list box. And display all notes, does an error check, and then goes over to the notes class with the list box to display them. When I display the selected note, goes error check, then goes over to display that index, and with delete does the same thing and takes the list box. When I do a search, it takes the list box. When I do a sort, it takes the list box with error checking. And when the main UI closes, it runs a closing method over in data structures and then disposes of this. So I'd say, yeah, the main controller is essentially done. The new note controller is essentially done. So what's left? Well, what's left is data structures still needs work. Note doesn't. We had already established that that one's done. Data structures needs a little work. We never did finish that one. So, I see. I made a horrible mistake back here in main controller. In display and delete selected, I put the methods in the wrong place. It should be in the notes class, not in the data structures class. Notes dot. So that's where that method goes. Good thing I checked. Create method. And same with this guy, as I copied and pasted that guy. Notes dot display selected. And create method. Come on. Okay. Now I can go back to data structures and wipe out those two methods. I'm thinking, what were those doing there? They're not supposed to be there. Okay, so we got data structures. It mostly needs commenting. The notes class, that needs work. We got a bunch of empty methods here to fill in. This is done, electronic notes. That's just main and it's all commented. And dialogues is one we just brought in. So that's nothing we need at this point. So I'm just going to not close these tabs. I'm just going to shift them over so I know kind of the ones at the end here are the ones I'm going to be working on. Okay, so data structures and notes. All right, so what we need to do is we need to now start working on the notes class. This is a big one, right? So on the notes class, what are we going to be working on, right? There's a lot. There's a lot to work on. And so let's start with some comments, right? Like what exactly the notes class will need. All right, and maybe we should also comment data structures while we're here, okay? Like data structures, this class that theoretically we've been working on here, we've got some stuff happening in it, but we've never actually commented on it. So let's do that. Let's do some commenting on data structures, get it done. Commenting was definitely one of our to-dos for today. All right, so what is data structures? This class is a shared class of properties, okay, which means they're static. That's why we made them static, to share them across this application of the main database data structure, okay, which is the list of all the notes, okay? So that main set of notes and other useful tools, i.e. the dialogues. But we don't need to get into too much detail on our documentation for that. So we have a title, we have fonts, we have backgrounds. We already wrote these in the previous video, but they're here now, so we can kind of clean them up if we want. Just take this time to kind of look at these and see if we can clean up this stuff a little bit. Sort of, okay, we got the title, we got the font, we got the background colors, we got the dialogues, we got the notes. Maybe these don't have to be public. We made them initially public, but maybe we should encapsulate these and make them private instead of public. That might be a better way to go. See if our logic still runs with it. We know dialogues and notes are going to need to be public. Let's write a comment for this. This initializes the startup of this application. And man, could I have made that any worse? Initializes the start of this application, loading our database from permanent storage, which is a file, into the data structures. We haven't done that yet, but that's coming, right? That's the idea, okay? And instantiate any other relevant classes, i.e. the dialogues. So we will instantiate all the other classes, which we have done. This is already done. The dialogues are set up. The notes are set up. That's our data structures. Pretty much done. We'll see if we need it for more stuff. Probably will. But let's move on to notes now. Okay, let me delete some of these weird error lines that got put in by NetBeans. I could put in a line of code like a stub again, but we've already kind of tested that. We're hoping that that connection is already pretty substantial. All right, I think it's time to add some comments to these things, right? What is the notes class? We got our required list, but what is the notes class? Let's start writing some commentary for the notes class. What is this class and what are these methods going to be? Okay, so notes is a collection. That was the idea of note objects and methods to organize those notes. In conjunction with the relevant user interfaces. That the user interacts with. When using the application. Good enough. I think that's a pretty good comment there. It bugs me that that touches the red line, so I'm just going to move that right to there. Okay, so that's what the notes class is going to do. Okay, let's talk about the constructor. But before we get to the constructor, let's consult our UML diagram for this thing called notes, and you'll actually see most of the relevant methods that we talked about are now in there. Add, remove, get all, get no, etc. They're all kind of there, but there is something else that you can see in there, a property, which is our linked list. And luckily, our linked list is something that we're just going to use from our class example. Okay, a private linked list. So this is going to need to be imported. And yeah, you could import the one that is part of Java utility. That's going to be a better one than the one we wrote in class. But the fact it's one we wrote in class is excellent for proving that we know what we're doing here. So I'm going to import that one, the one from collections. It holds note objects because it works with generics. I'm just going to call it list. It's our list. All right, let's write our constructor method. This is our default constructor method, which instantiates the class. That's what it does. Okay, so what needs to be, well, our list object equals a new linked list type note. That's what it does. Now, what we'll probably end up doing is, more likely, this will be when we connect it to permanent storage. That will be more likely what's going to happen. But I'm not going to get into that today. For today, let's not worry about having it saved to file. Let's just have it load while the program's running. Now, this makes the isEmpty method quite easy to deal with, right? Because now the isEmpty method can use the list object. So let's take a second to write its comment. It determines if the database is empty or not. That was what it needed to do. It's going to return that it is empty. It'll return true or not empty, which will return false. Okay, so instead of just returning true, now what we'll do is we'll access our list, which has its own isEmpty method, which is perfect. That just makes life easier. So our encapsulated list, which is private in the class, and if you want, it's encapsulated list object, right? It's not public, it's private, okay? We can now access whether it's empty or not. Now let's take a second to start commenting all these other methods that we've got to fill in. Let's take the time to do the comments today. So what does this one do? It adds the past note object, because that's what it is, note object, to our collection, which is our linked list. We now know how this is starting to come together, of notes. And it also updates the list box, the past list box on the main user interface. That's already done. We already have a line of code that does that. But what is this note right here? Well, that's the note object to add. Pretty simple. But how do we actually add it to the list? Well, luckily, our list has a built-in add method, which, as you can see, because it works with generics, knows to add that generic T data, which in this case is of type note. So it's very, very easy. We're adding the note to our linked list, and it's also adding it to our list box. Great, that actually is done. All right, so now let's move on. How do we display all the notes? Well, let's write the comment first. It displays all the notes in the database, right? And the database is our linked list. So if we just sort of keep that in mind, we know how we're going to do this. In the past list box from the main user interface. We already know all that. So what is this? This is the list box to update. That's what we're going to be updating, is that list box. That's what this method's supposed to do. So how do we do that? Well, let's just loop through it. Actually, one thing I'm going to do first is I'm going to take that list box and I'm going to remove all the things that are already in it. So I'm going to clear the list box first. Okay, if you want, I'm going to put that in as a little comment, an inline comment. Clear out anything in the list box. Okay, and then I'm going to loop through the database, adding in notes. So I'm going to run a for loop. We're going to go up to list.size. Okay, we're going to pull out a note. Note equals list.get at spot I. So as it goes through the loop, it gets a note. So now I have a note. Now I'm going to go into my list box, and I'm going to add that note dot turned into a string. this is where that toString method is going to come in handy again. Just display them all that way. A very easy way to get display all kind of thought out here. Now, that might also work a lot for me displaying the selected one and deleting the selected one. So I know I made a mistake when I wrote these methods. So I'm just going to move them up a little bit, cut them, and paste them after here, because that was kind of where I thought I would do them. And I think actually as well, these are in a slightly different order. I think display selected was the first one I wanted to write. Then we'll do delete selected. Let's write the comment. So what does display selected mean? Well, it displays the, or that note maybe, in. Now here's where we made a decision, in a dialogue. So that's how we're going to display it, in an actual dialogue. Interesting. All right. So what about index? It's the user selected, and they selected it from the list box. The user selected index of the note. So they select which one it is from that list box. So now I can display that one. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to do, first of all, the same line of code I did up here. I'm going to get a note first. Not from I, but from index. So I'm just going to comment that in, that I retrieve a note object from my list. That's what I just did. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a string, what I'm going to be displaying. And I'm going to go into my note, and I'm going to get the title. So I have the title of the note, and I'm going to attach to that title a space and an opening curly bracket. Then I'm going to add more to that display, that string. I'm going to add to it. So plus equals display plus. I'm going to go into that note, and I'm going to get the date out of there, and I'm going to attach onto that the other side of the the bracket, and also a couple of new line characters. And then finally, I'm going to take the display, and I'm going to add onto it the actual content. Now that I have all that content, I'm going to go over to data structures. I'm going to go to dialogues, and I'm going to output that text that I've been building up. I think it's time to do a bit of a test here to see if this actually would work. So now I'm going to actually create a note, walks March 30, 2020. This is a test of my code and adding in a new note from the user. I see here that it's doing a side scroll. That might be okay. I have to kind of think about if that's what I want in my user interface. Click OK. Now I'm going to actually select that note and display the selected note. Why, look at that. There's the title and the date in the format I wanted, along with the actual content with my misspelling of the word is, but nonetheless, there it is. Okay. That's really good. That's doing what I wanted it to do. Now for deleting the selected note, how am I going to do that? Well, and I think I misspelled retrieve here, right? I before E except after C. There we go. Retrieve a note object from the list. All right, so delete the selected note. Let's write our comment first. So that'll help us sort of give us an idea what we're about to do here. So it deletes that note, the note based on the index from the database, which is our list, and updates the deletion in the list box. So that's what we need to do. What's index? Well, it's the same thing it was up here, right? So I'm just going to steal that comment from up here. It's the user selected from the list box index of the note. And what's the notes list box? Well, that also I can steal as a comment from somewhere. It's the list box to update. That makes sense. Let's pop that in. Don't have to write that comment. Don't want to write that comment from the main user interface. Okay. So how am I going to do that? Well, again, this is easy because built into our linked list is a remove feature based on an index. So it's going to be easy. What about our notes list box? Well, one of the reasons I suggested using the list object from the AWT library was because, again, I knew there was a nice remove feature that could do this quite easily and remove based on that index. That's it. Let's see if it actually works. So I have to put in a couple sample notes here for this to actually try and delete it. Doesn't really matter what I put in for text. OK. Create another new note. Click OK. Try to delete the selected note. Oh, you have to select a note first. That was our error checking we did in the last video. Let's try and delete this selected note. And look at that. It's gone. It's gone. That's great. So we've deleted the selected note from our database. Holy moly, we're getting so much done at this point. So let's try and wrap up now, but let's at least write the comments for search and sort. And then that I think would be good enough for today. Write in what search does, write in what sort does, and write in what closing does in terms of commentary. So that's a good place that we can start our next video is at this point right here. All right, so search. What does search do? Okay, well, we kind of know a little bit about what it's going to do. Okay, search is going to ask the user, okay, and if you want, you can actually go back to the main controller and you could look at what it says right here, search all notes. We kind of have some commentary in there, so I'm just going to kind of rewrite that in a lot of ways. So it asks the user with a dialog for the text of the title, the date, or content, and it searches the database for any matching notes and highlights those. Highlights those notes in the list box. So that's what it's going to do. It's going to do that. And notes list box, well, we actually already know what that is. So I'm just going to steal this comment, pop that in, not only here, but here. Okay. All right. So we'll leave the actual guts of the method alone, but let's comment our sort method. So it asks the user with a dialog. And again, if you're wondering where I'm getting that from, it's actually in our design documentation. If you go back here to our figure 3, we actually knew that when we were searching that we'd be using a dialog for this. And when we'd be sorting, we'd be also using a dialog. So we kind of had already thought this out a little bit before we even coded it. So that's where I'm getting this from. I mean, we might change our mind, but we're getting some actual results here. So if they want the list sorted by date or title, those are the only two we thought we would sort by. And we're going to sort alphabetically. I think I spelled that right. Okay, so that's going to be our sort. And finally, what's going to happen when we're closing this, all the notes? Well, now we're going to save our database to a permanent file, otherwise known as storage. That's definitely going to be happening. This also reminds me that when this note thing is constructed, I'm going to add that in there. And it reads from our permanent file, or permanent storage, the database into the data structure, which is our collection. So I want that in there as a comment to remind me where we're going to go next with this. All right, well, that is what I wanted to do for this part of the video, and we did a lot. I want to just do one more quick thing. I want to actually try to run this thing. I haven't done that yet, so I just want to run it one more time. I guess I did. Display all notes. There is no notes to display. We got the error checking. Yeah, I think we actually did do all that. So I think I won't bother with any more of that, and instead say goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video. And that might be the last actual development video. We'll see how it goes. See you next time.